discuss the contents as it proceeds. My concern is that if the AICPA ED specifically proposes revisions to the definition of network firm, which goes right to the heart of how the code addresses APS structures, if IS Better doesn't engage on that definitional question, precisely because the board hasn't yet decided whether definitions are even the right starting point, there's a risk this becomes a missed opportunity to shape a very concrete and imminent piece of standard setting activity, I guess. So has the draft been shared with board members yet? And is there still time to ensure the weather is substantive on that specific point? That's my question.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Han. So to the first question, which is what comes first, analyzing if there is a threat or changing. Definitely the first, because if there is no threat, we don't need to change anything. And even if there is a threat, that doesn't mean that we need to change the definition. So the process is that first we analyze which threats, which risks are there, and then we check if the code and the existing definitions still respond to those threats.
But some people think that if there is no threat, we didn't even start this project, right? So,
of course, the threats, let's call it risks, because threat has a very technical meaning in the code, risks, or we see some threats, right? But the fact that there are threats doesn't mean that necessarily that the code does not respond. So we never anticipate a response. What the technical analysis that has been done says is that probably we will need to do something, but we never put ourselves ahead of the investigation and deep analysis that we will need to conduct. So will we, to your question, will we change the definitions? That's something I can't say at this point in time. AICPA on their side, yes, they will change the definitions. The code is not exactly the same as AICPA's consultation, although we see a lot of things there which we think are important. And we are a global standard setter, and this is a global framework. It's not a jurisdictional framework, so we need to step a little bit away of these alternative structures that the AICPA is addressing, because it's the reality in the US. But if you go to other parts of the globe, Middle East, for instance, just to go to a completely different part of the world, they say, no, these are not the only structures that we are seeing. We are seeing other things. So we need to make a broader analysis. And of course, anything that we do has to be kept at the principles level, and not go into the details. This said, it is possible. It is a possibility that some definitions need to be changed. Your second question, sorry, was about...
So has a draft been shared with board members yet? Or is there still time?
Oh, the letter, the response letter. No, I'm sorry, but the letter is with me since yesterday for revision. So... Yeah, and we know that that time is scarce, but we haven't. I haven't seen it yet. Of course, I have provided some direction. But what we had agreed, I cannot say anything else by now, is that we agreed it to be a very strategic and high-level response, and not to go into the granularity of the decisions or the proposals being made by AICPA, precisely because we cannot put ourselves ahead of a discussion that has to be had with the board, with stakeholders, and etc. We see some not benefits, but things there which we agree in principle from a technical perspective, but the letter is going to be more a positioning letter from the IESBA with respect to this initiative. Also, but not only, but also to try to align things from the start and try that this does not result in another situation where we have one jurisdiction doing something and then, having a global framework which is not adaptable. Being clear that we will do what we need to do with this approach, that we are a global standard setter, not a jurisdictional standard setter, so we need to have a broader vision and higher level vision than
Thank you, but in sync status, in sync is really important. So please, please move promptly.
Your mic is gone.
Thank you so much for that advice. Because, I know that we need to move fast, and we will do what we can do to move fast.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Han. Tom and then Mark.
Thank you very much. I'm asking perhaps this, almost the same question as Han, is that I observed the board meeting, and one of the interesting and the very important issue from the public interest perspective is, as you said, that's on one side, ESBA is the global baseline. And at the same time, then there is quite a lot of development in each jurisdiction. So some board members are a little bit hesitant to give some sort of a letter to each jurisdiction, the development to each jurisdiction. But at the same time, it's true that ESBA, it's important for ESBA to announce their global position. So from your position, from chair's position, how do you balance the two different thinking? The one is that a little bit keep some sort of arm's length from each jurisdiction, but at the same time, this is a burning issue. You have to pay attention to the development in each direction. So how do you navigate this balance? It's the first question. And the second question, almost same as Han, is that in this discussion, how the board of the ESBA will apply the due process, because the letter, submitting a letter itself is a sort of as you said, that will it be circulated among board members, or will it be, how can I say, written by staff and approved by the chair, or how that sort of the process or the due process will be maintained in issuing the letter? It's on sort of under the thinking of the broad discussion of the due process of NAM. There are many types of NAM, and I think that's the issuing or submitting a letter is a sort of one of the example of the process. So how do you manage that sort of the process for issuing the letter? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the questions, Tom. On the first one about how we navigate this tension between not paying too much attention to jurisdictional developments and still assuming our position as a global board, you were there during the discussion. There was a significant agreement and comfort at the end of the discussion around issuing the letter, and the main reason was agreeing that we cannot issue letters and respond to all consultations in all the jurisdictions. The arguments were mainly, this is the first formal regulatory development, a strong one, by the way, which may influence a lot of things on the one hand. Secondly, the fact that we have done some work and issued this staff alert somehow puts us in a position that not saying anything and staying silent might look a little bit odd. Because we really want to take the leadership, and the leadership does not mean that we want to be important with private equity, is that we want to take the leadership in the sense that we want as fast as possible to define a position which, if possible, avoids a lot of fragmented initiatives in the different jurisdictions. So from time to time, we face that kind of tension. We had it before, Australia, for instance, when that happened. Should we do something or not? It's a jurisdictional issue. But when things assume a certain level of importance and there is a possibility that they define the trend and the direction, then if it's something really relevant and where the ISBA needs to be present, then we prefer to take a public position. Also, to make clear what's our thinking, of course, for the time being, a very high-level thinking, but that was the way we discussed this, and I think that at the end of the conversation, everyone was very comfortable. One risk that we are aware, I am very aware of as chair of the ISBA, is the risk to be seen as following the AICPA initiative. It's not the case, and that's something that needed to be explained. It's not the case. When we issued the staff alert, it was clear that this was the start of a process and a journey, not yet. So we have been doing some work, some observing, discussing with many regulators and many firms about this topic, but this is a silent work that we have been doing until we came to this point. So clearly, I think that there is a lot of comfort around the table about this. On your second point, process. So this letter, as I said, unfortunately, I mean, I could not have it earlier, and I'm a bit nervous about it. But the idea is that I review it until Monday. So that's going to be my weekend. And then it will be circulated to the planning committee, which is a group of people, board members who support the leadership and the staff in making some decisions. And after the planning committee members bring their contributions and their feedback, then it's circulated to the board. So it's an open process. It's not that the staff and the chair are sending letters like this, and the board members are not invited to contribute, or at least be aware of what's being done. No secrets.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Gabrielle, for the explanation. Mark?
Yes, thank you, Shago. Thank you, Gabriella. As you know, the private equity investment is one of our public interest issues. It's been on there for some time. You know, we have sort of urged that this should be addressed comprehensively. Now, you put out your staff alert in July. At the board meeting in September last year, it was decided that it would be premature to initiate a full project on this. The AICPA, as we know, issued its exposure draft in December, not long after your September board meeting. My question is basically, were you aware that the AICPA was developing draft guidance at the time that you took the decision in September last year? And do you feel that IASBA has been sufficiently proactive on this topic, or do you feel that you could be accused of being rather too reactive, given your position as a leading international standard setter?
Well, Mark, I think that risk always exists of being seen as not enough proactive and reactive. I understand that, and that's what I was mentioning very openly, that there is a risk that perception exists. It's not the case. We have been working with AICPA already for almost 2 years now. AICPA even made some presentations to our board, to the stakeholder advisory, the JSS, jurisdictional standard setter. So I think that we had 3 presentations from AICPA over time. It's not that their positions and their concerns were of a surprise to us, but actually after the staff alert, we thought that we needed some time to make it land and do a little bit more observation and understand better what was happening. The reality is that in this specific area, the world is changing every day. So the stronger requests we are having, started after the staff alert, a lot of them from regulators in the US, not only AICPA, but for instance, NASBA did it, but we started hearing it around the world. Likewise, regulators, besides regulators, the firms themselves. So it grew in a way between autumn last year and this year that, of course, it became clear that we needed to accelerate what we had promised to do, which was to go deeper in the analysis and make some conclusion. Of course, I will not hide that having this, not only AICPA, but if you look at this slide and you see some signs of regulatory initiatives, which can be, for the time being, a little bit less robust than AICPA's one. But it's not impossible that some of these regulators will start doing a few things, made us accelerate a little bit the pace. And yesterday, I think it was you who asked, this was not in your strategy and work plan, where did you get the resources? It's a good question, because we also have to make this decision in combination with the resources that we have or that we don't have. So this acceleration of the process has to do more with the global environment and developments rather than with the fact that AICPA put out a consultation. Of course, it's an element, and it's an important element. We cannot neglect it. But the decision made in March is the result of everything that we have been hearing and the meetings that we have been having, and etc. between, say, September and March.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask about resources, but you've already covered that question. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel. I don't see any other points, but from my end, I think this is a very important focus area, and I'm glad IASPA is actually dedicating the focus required on the private equity investment. And I think you mentioned that you'll be considering that in the bigger, space of the firm culture and governance as well in your earlier slide. But in the interest of time, I think let's proceed because we'll be running late for the next agenda item.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Let me just say that this connection between firm culture and governance and private equity is very front of mind to us, and we even have one board member who is the liaison between the two board advisors groups and the two working groups to make sure that everything is well coordinated and that there are no issues. So the next topic on the agenda is technology, and I'm speaking about the second topic that was not in our strategy and work plan initially. None of them were priorities identified in 2024 when we started this cycle, but these are both good examples of how we monitor the environment, and as needed, we adjust and change the direction of travel with respect to our strategy and work plan. As this PIOB board knows, we have issued standards in December 2024, I believe, on technology. December 2023. That's when we issued some standards, and we have a very significant amount of non-authoritative material and thought leadership in this respect, including already artificial intelligence. So we were somehow ahead of the curve, and we were not planning, and importantly, we are not planning yet, for now, to issue any new standards in this respect. From what we have seen so far, the code as is, plus the non-authoritative material, may respond well to the developments. Anyway, the fast, intense, and disruptive developments with respect to technology and AI, of course, forced us to go back to this topic and see if there is anything else that we can do. For the time being, and I'm going to highlight again and stress again, for the time being, because I cannot anticipate the future, there is no standard setting project that we are foreseeing, but a lot of work in terms of adoption and implementation of the existing standards, support to stakeholders in terms of how the code applies to these new developments, both in an overarching way, the code itself, and then we will develop specific elements and specific supporting elements and materials for specific technologies and issues. So the working group, that's what we have created after issuing the standards. The working group was supposed just to monitor the developments and work together, the experts group that we have. This group has been refreshed with a new leadership, new composition, new members of the board, and the working group set up a working plan that was approved in March by the board. And this work plan includes, on the one hand, the preparation of development and publication of non-authoritative material on the application of the code on one hand, and specific pieces for specific technologies. The work plan includes all those elements: environmental scanning, board education, communication, the coordination with, importantly, with ISSB in terms of technology, and the podcast about which I am going to speak as well. And the idea is very much to create awareness of ethical issues and challenges resulting from the use of AI and technology in audit and accounting. There is a lack of awareness of the risks and the threats sometimes created by this, the uses of technology, We believe that we have a lot of material that help addressing these threats, but we need to make them more visible, more and better understood, and penetrate a different audience with these materials. So we approved an action plan on technology. As I said, on the one hand, we have an overarching non-authoritative material about how it applies, the code applies to technology-related matters. And then we will have dedicated non-authoritative material focused on, for now, on artificial intelligence, but this is not going to be the end of the road. This is the plan for 2026. We are aiming to have these materials out until the last quarter of 2026. And then what will follow, it's what we will need to understand. We have been also doing a podcast. We already have 4 episodes of this podcast out, and this is also the result of the commitment that we have made to try to communicate better and to pass the message and the knowledge in different ways. People nowadays don't read, that's the reality. Everyone writes, no one reads. People want very simple ways of accessing the information and the knowledge and etc. So it's a challenge for us because we need to reinvent ourselves as well as standard setters. The podcast was one instrument, and I can tell you that this takes a lot of resources. What you see in the podcast is the result of an incredible amount of work, technical work, technology work, technical work in the preparation of the podcasts, identifying the people, setting up everything. So it's don't think it's an easy thing because it's really resource consuming. Still, we believe that it's very important. We hear the people coming to us and saying, "Oh, A or B said that in that podcast. So how do you address this?" So it's having some impact. Not easy, by the way. We had a significant number of important or relevant people being present in these podcasts. We did one with, the first one was the record of the technology session in the IESBA conference last year. That was the first episode of the podcast. Then we had one with the ACCA people based on the survey that they made on ethics and AI. We had one on quantum computing with Clinton Firth, who is the EY Global cybersecurity responsible, and etc. So we had already a number of relevant people, but this is not easy, but we believe it's necessary to create awareness and understanding about ethical and independence risks resulting from technology. So I'm not going to go through this slide. This is just an example or for you to know the number of materials that IESBA has already put out, published, in terms of technology-related matters and artificial intelligence, which is a lot. So should I speak here, stop here?
Yes, I see a card up. I think there's a question. Han?
Okay, thank you very much for your explanation. I myself is not a tech expert, so I'm very careful in making any comments, but 3 points on technology, all interconnected. First is governance of name. For example, IAASB has Channel 4, board oversight throughout, public board approval of final content, and expert group support. IASBA's equivalent approach, and again, I'm quoting from the joint session material, has not been communicated, and yet IASBA is planning them across 4 different areas simultaneously. We can meaningfully oversee output from a process whose governance structure hasn't been defined. So before we get into content, can we get a commitment from you on when IASBA will articulate Channel 4 equivalent? That's my first question. Second is on the substance. Our own PIOB staff noted that the 2023 code revisions predated generative and agentic AI, and that it remains to be seen whether the principles are time-proof. IASBA's answer is, as far as I understand, we maintain a principles-based approach. But I don't think that's an answer. It's a restatement of the status quo. The agentic AI specifically creates a problem the current code doesn't resolve. When an autonomous system is making decisions in an audit context, the code's concept of professional judgment assumes a human exercising it. Has ISPA actually stress tested the existing principles against agentic AI use cases, or is the working assumption simply that they hold until proven otherwise? And my final point is the sequencing. The work plan has overarching technology agnostic NAM in Q3 and AI-specific NAM in Q4. But board itself said at the March meeting that the specific names are far more useful than overarching ones. And IFR has said the timeline is ready to slow. So my guess is, why not flip the sequence? Lead with the AI-specific name where the need is most acute, and let overarching framework follow once there's something concrete to generalize from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to try to respond to all the questions. I think that the first one about when are we going to, as far as I understand, release what exactly are we going to do in terms of content, because ISSB is clear about what they are going to address. We have not been clear. So this is not a standard setting project.
Yeah.
This is not a framework. We are not aiming for now to create a new framework. We are just trying to understand as we go where it is more necessary to provide support in terms of understanding, in terms of the application of the code to specific technologies, etc. These are the ones that we have seen first, and of course AI, it's front of mind to everyone, and it's what we are going to address. And in AI, it's going to be agentic, probably agentic AI and generative AI and all these things. For instance, quantum computing is not in our radar. I mean, we had a podcast about it, but we don't think it's a priority to do work on quantum computing. There are much more pressing areas than this one. So it's a bit, for now, I would not say ad hoc, because it's based on significant research and discussion, but we don't have yet an idea of a full plan of contents for the next time. We have it for 2026 so far, and this one on specific technology, of course, is going to be developed and communicated, namely to the PIOB, as soon as we have something more concrete. But I take that concern back and have it very front of mind as we move forward with this work. In terms of sequencing, what can I say?
I don't know.
Yes, time is of relevance and importance. I'm always known by my board to be the one who always pushing for things to happen very quickly, and I'm completely aware of the need to move quick here, just like on private equity. And that's why, and your questions are very significant and relevant and appropriate, because both these topics moved quickly on our agenda in a way that had not been foreseen or anticipated. The sequencing, first overarching, then a little bit later the specific pieces. Yes, there was a discussion at the board. Probably I need to listen to my board and to my staff. Probably I might have taken a different approach with respect to this sequencing, but the board and the staff, based on the capacity as well, thought that this was the best approach. Let's be clear, and again, the resources are not irrelevant and neutral to the way we set the sequencing and the timelines. And of course, the first piece, the overarching one, will very much rely on what has already been done in the past. So it's going to be a little bit easier, and combining the need to be quick as possible and come up with something and ensure some robustness that we, of course, need to ensure. It was considered that this was the right way. There is a non-disclosed ambition to have the specific part, and I think that Tom listened to this discussion and what I asked for, that this specific piece on AI might be a little bit anticipated, but we are not wanting to commit because we don't know if that is possible. It's not impossible, but we don't know if it's possible, so we prefer to set the okay.
All right, so thank you, Han, and thank you, Tom. Let's move to Dave and then Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and Gabriela, thanks for the update. A little bit of this is a follow-up to what Han was saying. That I sat through the IAASB meeting. They obviously also had a technology discussion, and in their project plan, there were a few things that I'd like to know whether or not the board considered those. And maybe before I ask or lay that out, the relevance of that to me, from our perspective as the PIOB, is that the development of NAM happens at the board level without the oversight of the PIOB, and which is fine. We have all sorts of ways of providing guidance, and I think that's really important that we do. I know in at least my understanding, Tom is here and he can correct me if I'm wrong. In the project plan that the IAASB approved, there'll be board oversight, so it's not just a staff alert, for example. There'll be board oversight. There are pluses and minuses to that. Board oversight means it's going to take a little longer, but it also is ensuring that the quality is there, I think. There is a statement in their project plan that says that NAMs are not a substitute for standard setting. And while I know I see you shaking your head, I know you agree with that. That's something they were explicit about. The other thing they were explicit about was that they would be applying the public interest framework in the development of NAMs. And again, I don't know if that's a part of the process or if you've discussed that, but I'd encourage you to think about it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. This is very clear to us, and the PIOB has made that remark very clearly about the need to think about how the due process and oversight applies to NAM as well. For us, it's absolutely clear that NAM should not and cannot replace standards. It's a completely different role. We have issued a lot of NAM over time. I must say, most of it under the request or by the request of the firms for us to issue NAM. It's not that we decided to do it all the time ourselves, but we understand that this is becoming very something that about which stakeholders and regulators are also concerned. So the process will be as clear and transparent as possible all the time, and we can see as we go if there is anything else that we need to do. NAM is not standards, and we are not developing NAM just because we want to do standards in a quicker way. It's different material.
Thanks, Gabriela. I think this topic of NAM is an ongoing discussion, and I think Dave makes a fair point about comparing what is happening in the ISB versus the ISBA, and trying to get some sort of consistency in the approach or process, as they say. Right, Mark.
Yeah, so also just thinking about the project that the IAASB is also conducting in the technology area, and I know that you have been coordinating with Tom and his team, and you've been doing outreach. You've attended the IAASB's sort of roundtable on this topic. Can you update us on the progress of your coordination efforts, and whether it may be too early at this stage, but whether there are any key takeaways that you've already identified, from that in the ethical space, and a related question, we obviously everybody's hearing about AI at the moment. Is this all about AI, or have the team identified other technology developments outside of AI that are relevant to this project?
So, Mark, on the coordination, yes, as you mentioned, we have some mechanisms in place to make sure that at all time any developments for the time being, or until now, on IWSP side are known and analyzed on our side to see if there are any implications for the ISBA and for the on ethics and independence, and vice versa. Vice versa in the sense that these implications might also affect the work that they are doing. So far, I'm not aware of any issue that has been already identified from the work that has been that the IWSP is doing, but we are keeping very attentive, and the intention is to continue observing and trying to understand everything, so that if it's the case, we identify any issue earlier than later, and that we can address it together. So this coordination matter and consideration with respect to technology is very clear, and we have in practice the necessary mechanisms to make sure that there will be no, we hope, no issues, no problems, no concerns later in the process with respect to anything that we may have missed and that might affect us or reflect in their work. So that's how much I can say for now. We have two staff members who are constantly in coordination. Sometimes they have made joint presentations to the board on common topics which might be addressed from both sides, etc. So I don't think that we are missing anything, that there is any gap, but of course we need to be attentive all the time. With respect to the topics, AI and others, AI was the first one that has been identified by the board, staff and board, as the one that we should not delay doing some work on. That doesn't mean that it exhausts everything. If you go back to all the materials that the ISBA published before, they include AI, but they include other topics, blockchain, other topics. So the idea is also that we will take these materials, revisit some of the topics which are not necessarily only on AI, and leverage on what we have already done to, on the one hand, provide additional support to stakeholders in respect to how the code applies to these specific areas, but also, and this is also a response, I think that for you that I missed, the idea, that the objective is also that in doing so, we try to identify any possible gaps that may force us to open a project to make some narrow scope amendment to the code or some new standards or whatever. This is mostly an exercise to support stakeholders, but it's not a post-implementation review, but it works a little bit like a post-implementation review in the sense that it will allow us to understand how this is working and if there is anything else that we need to do. So we are not putting other technologies and areas aside. Cybersecurity is clearly one where we will need to do something, and some of the firms and regulators are already flagging that to us. But we can only do what we can do, and it was considered that AI was the burning issue that we could not delay.
Thank you, Gabriela.
Thank you. I think we are really losing time. Let me ask that we move to the last, I think it's the last one, the sustainability. We still have a few, but the last one. Okay. Yeah, sustainability.
I'll try to say one sentence about each one of the projects, and taking the slides as read, of course, make myself available for any questions. So sustainability, it was the project or the work that we started, information gathering. The objective was to see if there was a need, if it was in the public interest, to undertake a project to develop independence standards for sustainability assurance engagements, which are not covered by the scope of the ESA. As you will remember, the ESA covers only the most relevant, let's put it like this, leaving technicalities aside, the most relevant public interest engagements, and leaves everything aside, outside of the scope of the ESA, which means that the other engagements need to use Part 4B of the code, which is meant for independence provisions for assurance engagements, which are not audit engagements. So the PIOB, and I think that rightly enough, raised by the time we were finalizing the ESA, the concern that the scope was too narrow, and that we should the scope of the project, and that we should have covered as well the ones which were being left outside of the scope. So we initiated this project with a full open mind, see what we were going to find. I will not anticipate the response, the conclusions, but I can tell you that the appetite, apparently the appetite for the IESBA to do such a project is not very relevant, and this is probably because of two reasons. On the one hand, the world changed with the Omnibus Directive. The number of engagements, the voluntary engagements and the voluntary frameworks became much more significant and changed the world a little bit. On the other hand, the reality is that it's very early days. This YESA is not yet being applied in most of the jurisdictions. The effective date is by end 2026. So we cannot draw, probably we or the market cannot draw many conclusions about what is needed outside the scope of the ESA because the application is not yet there. So this is where we are. This has been a very significant information gathering exercise through a survey, meetings, etc. And the results seem to be quite consistent and pointing in a certain direction that, again, I don't want to anticipate, but that doesn't seem to be much appetite or call for us to do this project. So everything is possible by now, but it starts being clear that the possible direction of the project. Any question? Can I move? So the preliminary responses are there. I'm going to take them as read. From Culture and Governance, I just wanted to provide an update to the PIOB since we last spoke about this project. I'm not going to go back and explain the project because I think that the PIOB is very well aware. What we decided in January, what we decided in December was that we were going to start a 6-month intense outreach phase, the FCG from Culture and Governance dialogues. And this was a three-pronged, if I may say so, exercise. On the one hand, having the usual meetings with institutional stakeholders, former firms, the PIOB, the IFIA, IOSCO, etc., over these 6 months, addressing the topic. We decided to create these focus groups, which is the first time that I think we do before an exposure draft, to make sure that we were discussing with the firms and the regulators in a way that would allow us to bring us real life knowledge and to be very close to them before we make a decision. And we also decided to do these simulations with, in this case, with 2 firms, one big firm and one smaller mid-sized firm in different parts of the globe, also to help gathering information about how this might work in practice, how the viewpoints might work in practice. This is where we are now. This has been an extremely intensive outreach period in this respect. Resource intensive, but we did want to make sure that in June, when we make a decision about what kind of framework are we going to develop, is it something in the code, is it something outside the code, is it non-authoritative material, a hybrid or mixed approach, we would have all the information besides the regular, usual outreach that we do. And after 2 years of outreach, that's what we are speaking about, that we would find ways of getting closer to stakeholders and having a real-life discussion with them. And that's what we are doing with the focus groups and the simulations. The focus groups meetings, the first meeting with each one of the focus groups, GPPC, small and medium practices, regulators, 3 focus groups, have already been held. The last one with GPPC was 3 days ago. And then there will be a joint meeting with all of them together so that they cross information and knowledge about what resulted from each one of the groups, so that it is a completely transparent and shared exercise of information gathering. The objective, again, is that in June the board will make a decision about what kind of framework this is going to be. Which content will it have? Which authority, where will it sit? Of course, this is the one thing that I need to say. There were concerns about the linkages, the connection of this exercise with ISQM1. So we did some work first, like a sample with 2 of the viewpoints comparing. I don't like to use the word comparing because we cannot compare things which are completely different, but assessing how much these two viewpoints were working together or not working with ISQM1, if there were overlaps, if there were any issues, problems, etc. The exercise was considered so relevant and important that we decided together to do the same for all the viewpoints, complete the exercise for the 8 viewpoints. This has been a full collaborative work with IAASP. Actually, we are very grateful to the IAASP for the very much relevant contribution, to say the least, that they gave, because of course they are the experts on ISQM1, and we could not do this without ISQM1 being part of the project. So it was really a shared project to develop these linkages between the two things, let's call it like this, the ISQM1 framework and the viewpoints. And it seems to have calmed the market very much, because we are not hearing as much as we were hearing about ISQM1. There are still some concerns. Outside regulators now are more concerned than the firms, probably. Some suggestions that we heard recently from one regulator that might lead to reopen ISQM1 and include a few things on ISQM1, but I think that this is, not a consistent approach, and that both regulators and the firms are now much more content, much more satisfied and calm about how this might work together. So it was a productive and very useful work that some call gap analysis. I also don't think this is about gaps. I don't think that ISQM1 has any gap that we need to fill in with a firm culture and governance project, and that was never the objective. Of course, we are, like everything we do, the work that the IASB does is somehow complementary in some parts of what the work of ISQM1, and that's how it works together.
Before you move, oh yes, yes, go ahead.
Thanks for that update. And I guess, and maybe this is a yes or no question, I don't know. I appreciated hearing about the linkages, because I think that's been one of the issues I've wondered is how has some of the aspects of firm culture and governance already been addressed in ISQM1? So I'm assuming that by going through this process, it also helps you narrow the scope of what you possibly could do in the future, because certain things have already been dealt with ISQM1. And to your point, while it may not have shown any gaps in ISQM1, if it did, certainly we'd want to know about that as well. Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe, Gabriela, my question was going to be linked to what Dave is saying. I guess for me, the question I had in my mind is, so we've done the linkages, what's next? So it has left me with that feeling of what is next now that we've done the, as you say, it's not a gap analysis, but more, how does this link? So what's next after this process? Thanks.
Well, the linkages, the work on the linkages was done to respond to some concerns about if there was conflicts, overlaps, any problems in respect to the two frameworks. Let's call them frameworks. It was a response initiative, not something to start any other project. Of course, we will take the conclusions of this work, as Dave was saying. We will take the conclusions of this work when we decide on our side what to do with the framework, of course, always in coordination with IAASP. I don't think that there is a next step for the linkages. The next step is really based on the information and the understanding that we managed to get about how this work together. The decision that we will make about the framework, of course, will embed and include and take into consideration the conclusions of that linkages document. So we don't have, at least for now, a next step for the linkages. This was really, and more than it was initially planned, which was let's do two of the viewpoints to just as an example. We did more, and it was the objective was really to try to demonstrate that there is not an issue, but of course there is a lot of knowledge that we will take forward when we make the decision.
No, thanks. I guess it was that conclusion aspect. Possibly next step is not the best thing, but it's that conclusion aspect. So how does this now conclude? But I think you've touched on that. Don't see any other questions. No, I think you can proceed.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. They are very close to the adoption point, so we are very satisfied and happy with how this is moving and willing to provide all the necessary support. The IMAG is a very important element and instrument that will allow us and is already allowing us to identify possible fatal flaws or obstacles or difficulties that we may need to address, be it through additional support, NAM, or if we find any fatal flaw, any narrow scope amendment that we need to make as soon as possible.
Thanks, Gabriela. And I guess the slide is useful in terms of addressing the point of global adoption and the different phases that you have pointed out. I see there's a question from Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to ask not only on the adoption, but the overall strategy for the next 3, 6, or 9 months, because there's on one side there's an so-called phenomenon called the survey fatigue, and at the same time that because not only on their ESPA side there's a PIR and the EDs and the SWPs, and at the same time that we are ESPA and then IWS is very in a critical moment for moving forward. I think that the firm culture and governance is very important topic, and so you will need more engagement with the stakeholders, especially after the June meeting, because you will find you will show some sort of a direction after that. So the closer on one side, the closer engagement is quite how can I say essential for moving forward. And as for the SWP, it's really fundamental for that's how we design the role of IWSB and ESBA for the next stage. So it may also need some sort of a closer engagement with the schedule. Well, so on one side, there is a so-called survey fatigue phenomenon, but at the same time, this is really critical time for more engagement. How do you get the right balance for it? And what is the discussion among the board members? I heard that there is quite a lot of discussion in the ISBA for in that perspective. So could you share with thank you.
Thank you, Tom. $5 million question. How do we balance those two tensions? It's really something that we have been discussing, and it's not always easy to find the right balance. As you said, there is a survey and even feedback fatigue. Stakeholders are a little bit complaining against how much they are being requested. If we look at the first 3 months of the year, the number of surveys that they received from both boards is, well, significant to say the least. So it's not easy to balance, because if we don't do, we will be blamed for not reaching out to stakeholders and gathering the information that we need. If we do, they will say it's too much, we cannot respond to everything, stop working. So yes, I think that on FCG, of course, it will be a lot of outreach will be needed, but the incredible effort, the unique effort that we have been making before making the decision, I think will provide us a little bit of a relief and provide stakeholders a relief as well for some time as we evolve to something, be it an exposure draft or something different. So I'm less concerned in that respect because I think that the first 6 months of the year were exactly the 6 months of the heavy lift in terms of firm culture and governance, and that we will have some space and breadth for the strategy and work plan. But it's not a science. It's more an art of listening and intuition, understanding how to deal with the market when these tensions arise, and understandably.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Gabriela. Mark.
I have, I think, what will be quite a quick question. Given that we've got a slide up here about the adoption and implementation of sustainability, I just want to cast my mind back to the work you're doing on Part 4B. And given that obviously everybody's efforts are going into implementing the standards, do you not think that it might be better just to, as far as 4B is concerned, just to leave things as they are for now and perhaps address that as part of a post-implementation review of the overall standards?
Thank you for the advice, Mark. It's probably going to be, it's one of the possibilities that we somehow park this project, not exactly cancel, but park and see how it goes. But again, I don't want to put myself ahead of my board and the decisions that we will need to make a little bit later. But thank you for the advice.
Thanks, Gabriela. And perhaps while we're still on the global adoption and implementation, would there be any challenges that you are foreseeing or you are encountering as you are getting feedback on how the global adoption and implementation is happening?
Actually, we have not been hearing much in terms of obstacles, difficulties, or whatever. There was that concern when the standard was issued about complexity and all these things. We know that the topic was mostly value chain. Value chain became almost irrelevant with the changes that occurred in the regulations and etc. On the one hand, on the other hand, I think that when the jurisdictions started working on the implementation, they realized that nothing there was really very new because they had the Part 4A already implemented. They had done the heavy lift with Part 4A, and this Part 5 basically reflects the same principles, the same approach, the same thinking, and the same mechanisms, but applied to sustainability. So there was no the perceived complexity. I think it stemmed more from the dimension than for the real complexity for the firms, because they had the experience already with implementation of the independent standards in Part 4A. Nothing very different there. So far, of course, I think that as we go, we may hear something different. And with the IMAG, we really hope to identify the issues sooner than later and be able to deal with them. But so far, we haven't been hearing much about it. Except, well, again, value chain in the, where it is still relevant, that it brings some challenges. Also, this is the scope of the ESA, which was something that stakeholders were not paying very much attention. The scope of the ESA is really narrow, so it's not for all the engagements. It's not for even the SMP who were so concerned about this, they think that they understood that they are not most of the times, they will not have to deal with the ESA because they are not involved in this kind of engagements. So, calm.
No, thank you for that. Are we almost there in terms of completing your presentation? I know Tom is patiently waiting to come next. Are you done, or you still have a?
Yes, I am. If you are,
All right.
I am too. And thank you very much.
No, thanks for that. I think fruitful conversations, and in the spirit of that continuous improvement, we'll keep hearing what the board, from the ESBA point of view, is doing in their work plan. Right. Tom, are you ready to go next?
I ready? Sure, why not? Good morning, everyone. I don't know who controls the slides, but I'm going to do, first of all, I'm not sure how much time I have, but secondly, I'm going to assume that you've read the slides and just make some introductory remarks for each section to allow you to ask questions or to comment or provide feedback, which is the most important thing. You will note that the slide deck focuses basically on our technology related projects, although some of the projects aren't just exclusively technology. Remember that our strategy says we're going to focus on the issues of the greatest public interest and sort of deprioritize everything else. From our standpoint, remember that our work plan focuses on technology-related matters, areas that require modernization or monitoring of recently approved standards, and continued support in the assured space. So it makes sense to focus on these. And I think if you say this here, and the other thing in the background, and we hear a lot from you, as you in your oversight role, certainly hear a lot about the staff-driven model. A couple of things I want to say on this is, remember, these are going to be the first standards produced totally under the staff-driven model. So any say that previous standards were subject to the staff-driven model in full, is just doesn't reflect reality. However, staff-driven model is something we're leveraging, but the important thing is that the board's accountable for everything. It's all board-led, significant board involvement from day one, chair and vice chair involvement, two board project managers on these, regular outreach across the board. We leverage external expertise from different stakeholders, and it's all subject to our robust due process and adherence to the public interest framework. Now, the QM code, remember, from a technology standpoint, 3 prongs to it. We're going to deal with one of the prongs, all 3 prongs today. That's audit evidence risk response. 520, that's about getting the foundational principles right, both from an audit evidence perspective and a performance perspective. QM, the idea of why we're focused on QM is that we're not going to set standards for specific technologies, but about how the technologies are being deployed and governed. This is not dissimilar to how models are governed at financial institutions and a well-regulated system. QM provides a framework for that. And the idea, at least the genesis of this, is that if things are tightly managed from a quality perspective in terms of their acquisition, development, and deployment, and they're used for the appropriate purposes by people who exercise professional judgment and professional skepticism with the right oversight, then we should get more comfortable with the tools themselves. There's more need to deal with that right now because technology is evolving so quickly. So you see on this side, public interest objectives very clear on this project. We're not doing this by ourselves, reflecting lots of roundtable help. We've had 8 roundtables globally. Importantly, what I think is what we've concluded, that ISQM1 and ISA 220 by themselves, the principles are robust. There's no need to create new requirements, but for the moment, whatever we do, it has to have significant board involvement. And I heard in the last section that you talked about our Channel 4 things. I'm sorry that we standard setters create all of these new terminologies, but basically it means NOM with the highest board involvement and transparency to the marketplace. remember, we now chose to do non-authoritative materials because we had a consideration of whether standard setting or non-authoritative materials were required. We considered qualitative characteristics. But remember, we came out of the thing is that the principles of QM are deemed sound. And this is something that we heard across the board at the roundtables, that the nature of the guidance isn't to add onto those principles. That NOM provides the opportunity to move the most quickly, and speed, the need for speed, so to say. I guess we were talking about kids yesterday, for those who watch Cars. That's like, we have a need for speed here, but really, that people said we need things fast, the marketplace. And remember, NOM doesn't preclude future standard setting. We could build off the NOM for requirements if things start to solidify, if people think, remember, ISO 5000 built off effectively what was NOM, EER guidance plus 3000 and 3410. So that's where we are as a board from this standpoint. Just quickly, where it's going to lay up is that we'll have a series of guides. We're really focusing on the AI elements of this, but I think it was Han or Tom who asked earlier, AI is not the only thing we're doing in this world from a technology perspective, but 3 layers here, things, foundational Gen AI models, how you incorporate it in a firm. Most firms aren't developing their own Gen AI models. They're using ChatGPT, Anthropic, Microsoft's version, whatever it is that's being developed externally, how you bring it in, and how you layer things on top. That's theme 2. And then how they're applied at the engagement. And then there's a matrix of issues. What we decided to do is not be rigid in the approach. We're not writing one guide and then move into the next layer and another. Let's deal with it topic by topic within each theme, so we can move quickly. So there may be things we want to prioritize in theme 1, where we'll probably dedicate a lot of energy right now, and then move to topics in Q2, but there'll be work going simultaneously. The other thing we want to say is that we're not going to reinvent the wheel. If there's other guidance out in the marketplace by other standard setters, we'll leverage that. And there is other work out there, and this is something that we've been very clear about. And then there's the timeline. So I'll stop there, and I think that's enough introduction on QM.
Thanks, Tom. I think Han was first, and then Dave. Questions, reflections?
Thank you, Tom, for your hard work. I want to start with what I think is a fundamental tension in this whole work stream. Enforceable standards are slow, and fast guidance isn't enforceable. And the gap between these two, AI is already reshaping the audit landscape in real time. That's not a criticism of this approach. I understand why the board landed on non-authoritative materials as a vehicle here. But it means that the questions we have to ask need to be sharper than how do you plan to address this? So 3 specific things I'd like to push on. First, is there an explicit trigger in the action plan that would automatically initiate a standard setting project if inspection findings or adoption data show that non-authoritative materials aren't producing consistent behavior? Not a plan to consider it, but actual threshold. Second, Channel 4 requires a board review and approval of each guidance in public session. How long does that actually take from a guide being ready to board approval? Because that number tells us whether non-authoritative materials are genuinely more agile than standard setting or just differently slow. And third, my understanding is the last guidance will not be out there until the second quarter of 2027. If AI landscape looks materially different by then, which I think it almost certainly will, what's the contingency? Is there a mechanism for mid-course revision, or does the team deliver what was planned and start over? So those are 3 comments or questions.
Yeah, Dave can go next.
Tom, I have a comment, not a question, which gives you time to think about your response to Han. Really, it's a comment for the PIOB members here that at the March IAASB meeting, when they considered this project plan, as Tom indicated, this is staff-driven. There was a very robust discussion about the draft plan that was provided to the board. And some very direct guidance that the plan wasn't quick enough, agile enough, and it was maybe too linear. You know, we'll address one project, the next one, the next one, the next one. That we really don't have the luxury of doing that in a linear fashion, but that we needed to be more agile. And so to me, it was evidence that the staff had done a very good job of putting together a plan, but it was really the board's decision on what was going to happen and when it was going to happen. And I thought I appreciated the kind of seeing all of that in action rather than just seeing the final product, and you don't really know, well, what impact did a staff-driven, board-led model have on this. It was a real-life example that it was the board's final decision, and the staff followed that in coming up with the project plan that they agreed on at the March meeting.
Great. Thank you, Dave, for highlighting that. And certainly, even in the creation of what the staff presented that the board then inputted on, I was involved in reviewing it. Ado and Nancy, who are the project board members, were involved, and others were consulted on it, who are part of our technology working group internally. So I think that's an example. So I'm glad you highlighted it. Let me try to deal with it. In terms of a specific threshold for standard setting, I don't think there's probably a quantitative almost type of approach, but I think we will always have to assess as if there's going to be inspection findings on QM, particularly related to technology matters. Then we go back to the original question: is it the standard itself, or is it performance in implementing a standard? But I think our system allows us to flexibly add stuff to the work plan. One other thing that is relevant for a lot of the discussions we've had today is that we will need to begin a post-implementation review on ISQM1. So that may reveal the need for standard setting simultaneously to this. And maybe we'll get to the point, based upon a lot of different things happening, is that we need to accelerate the time frame of QM1 and maybe even bump it up on our agenda. So that's I think we maintain that optionality here. Channel 4 does require board approval. I think the only issue about that in terms of delay in timing, in terms of agility, is it requires an actual board meeting to get it out. So I think maybe it adds a potential month or so in the process. I think it's well worth it for the purposes. It's still much faster than standard setting because you have to go through formal exposure and analysis of exposure and redeliberations. And so that's the thing. But what we may end up starting to do again is using these mid-quarter board calls to pull things out because people are able to review these papers more quickly. So I hope that is responsive to your point, but it's still, I think there's a distinction in terms of the time frames between that and formal standard setting. And then thirdly, you note that by the end of 2027, I think there's 2 points to this. One, yes, I think we can adapt mid-course, and that's partly the logic of NOM is that, or a non-authoritative material, I hate acronyms, by the way. And non may be the worst, one of the worst of them all. So the idea is that when we're doing these themes and topic by topic within a theme, we're now able to sort of pull it out. So like the way I conceptualize this, and maybe this is just me, we have theme one. We're not going to write a volume on theme one, but we're going to write maybe 10 different topics under theme one. And maybe we write topic 1.3. We could always pull and revise that within. And sort of you take that out, you put a new one in. Like obviously we hope that they're more durable than change it every 5-6 months. But I think that's one of the benefits of doing a guidance first approach. It also is one of the benefits going to Y 2027. We're going to get the things out that are most demanded in the marketplace first within each of those themes. So yes, some things will come out in 2027, but we should have a lot out by the end of this year. And, so I hope that responds to your question. If I missed anything, please let me know.
Don't see any other hands. But for my benefit, Tom, on the use of the expert groups, could you just add some color there to understand, what the criteria of establishing those and what their real purpose is in terms of the real contribution to the process you've outlined?
Look, I'm just pulling it up because I've got a recent update on the expert group. I've said, and we have used expert or reference groups for major projects pretty much going forward. I think it's probably good practice, particularly under a staff-driven model, because the risk is always that you need up-to-date practical experience in projects. On this group, we're thinking about a group of 16 to 18. It's being created. We want experts in practice, which includes the major accounting firms, but we're also included, so probably about half, but we're very conscious of not to be over-dominated by one perspective, but also have regulators, users, preparers, and other software providers also comprise about the other half. We've worked closely with the GPPC and Forum of Firms and IFAC to identify a diverse group, but people who are actually expert on the QM front in technology deployment, because that's what we need. And we've gone to the leading software providers and regulators. So as of now, we have two audit regulators participating, UK FRC, CPAB, I expect the PCOB, but we'll also have IOSCO involved as well. So I think there's a diversity of perspective and research. Like our goal is to share drafts with them, identify and help them, go to them to prioritize which are the themes that we should be thinking of and which are the topics within the themes. A first meeting is already set to happen in early May. So, and it's really a group to bounce ideas off of and to make sure that we're drafting things properly and usefully.
Thanks for the addition. Tom, the other Tom?
Very much. This is not a question, just a comment on the coordination between the IWSB and ESB. And as Gabriela said, that still the particular issue may not be identified. I think that's for example, in development of the NAM, for example, the management of the data bias, or for example, the management of the data confidentiality, and what is the relationship between the confidentiality and the data anonymization. might be a little bit the topic. It's very technical, so might be dealt with the the remit of the IWSB, but may have an impact on the discussion in the ESB as well. So I just want to flag that perhaps, and you are very well aware of it, because we have some sort of the coordination issue, especially in the space of NAM. For example, the FAQ may have a big impact on the IWSB discussion. So I just want to flag that that sort of the coordination is really, really critical in this issue as well. Thank you.
Well noted, and I think Gabriella described how the two teams are interacting, and that's very much on the top of our minds.
Thanks, Tom. Shall we continue?
Sorry. Audit evidence and risk response. I'm just going to make a few things. In my notes on my slides here, you see we were detailed about how we are trying to respond to the public interest issues, and certainly could answer a few questions about it. We've talked about this project a lot. It's scheduled for approval as an exposure draft in June. So let me just say something on that topic, since you care about process and quality more generally. So we are where we are on most major projects at this time. There are lots of changes, lots of refinements of drafting happening at this stage. The board gave significant substantive comments at the March meeting on all elements of this project. And for that reason, in fact, we've added a mid-quarter board call on May 6th to go over some of the major areas in front of us. We are working with external parties as well to make sure that we're creating nothing that has a fatal flaw. And I say this because it is probably one of the most complex topics that we're doing. These are highly technical, conceptual standards. They drive audit methodology, and they will likely be in place for years. And so we will need to make sure, as key foundational standards, that they work and that they're going to be fit for purpose and stand the test of time. So clearly, interaction with both regulators and the profession is key. We are building touch points from here to the approval of the ED. We also have to be clear, because it's 3 different standards plus conformity and consequential amendments. So we have to make sure that things are fitted together as well, and that there's not unintended consequences. But I give you the commitment is that we will not approve the standard before we believe it's time to approve the standard. We think that June still works, but if we need to, we have a late July board meeting as well. And that remains a possibility, get through all the substantial issues in June and continue to use an extra few weeks to draft and to check that there's no fatal flaws. And I think that's a good contingency plan, but there's nothing that's different than when we approved all the QM standards. There were 3 there, and also ISA 315, which was a complex standard. So I wanted to make that point. Secondly, we're doing our own stand back right now, and I think Mark has made this point when he's observed as well, is it's very technical. How do you make sure that you're actually accomplishing what you set out to do in the project plan? And, we're trying to constantly articulate how this is happening. And the slide on 10 is an effort to say, these are the things that we're trying to do. Have we done it? And so I think that's been a really useful exercise. And we're finding things out, and we're making sure that things are improved. People focused a lot on what people call the removal of paragraph 330.18. And it's not really a removal, it's an augmentation of the risk-based model. But we're going to add like one of the things discussed in May is, do we still need an overarching substantive procedures requirement in the standards now having removed that? And so I just say that in terms of both process, in terms of our commitment to quality, at some point pens have to go down and we want to consult. So the decision about when to go for a full vote is like, have we done everything we need to do to get the appropriate amount of comment in the marketplace to finish it off? One other thing is, there is a timeline issue. My term does end at the end of December 2027. And we've built in a long comment period for this because it is complex. We could get 150 plus, about 130 to 50-day comment period if we use the contingency plan. Go over that, that means it's the next chair will have to take on this major project. So that never should be the driver, but it is a practical consideration because these standards are so important to deal with technology issues. And I just left that slide up so you can see of how technology is an element of what we're doing here. So I'll pause there and happy to take comments.
I haven't seen any cards go up. Let me check Felipe. No. Dave.
Can't let it go without any question, Tom. And this may be a little specific, and I think in my personal opinion, IAASB has done a good job of addressing an issue that we've raised, but that encouraging auditors to consider internal controls, and so the question I'm about to raise is sort of anti that, although it's some of the informal feedback I've heard from smaller, medium-sized firms. The question is, and I think the answer is no, but the question is, does that mean that in a simpler audit, you wouldn't be able to take a substantive approach? You'd have to rely on controls. And I don't think that's the intent of this. It's more to encourage auditors to consider controls in an audit, but when that's not efficient and that sort of thing, an auditor will make the decisions they're going to make. But knowing that may be some of the feedback you get once this exposure draft goes out, how do you respond to that today, not having had the formal feedback?
I think, Dave, your answer to your own question is right. And I think we probably drafted some things that probably haven't helped that understanding out. And so that's one of the areas that we're working on right now. It's really about balance. And again, when you remove, I was saying this to the team the other day, it's like, and it is already the case with 330, a lot of it focuses on test of controls, but substantive procedures are still a core element of what people do. So we may have given people the misimpression that we were mandating a controls-based approach. That's not what it is, but we're trying to get the balance right, be responsive to many of the issues that you raised in the public interest issues, and clarify it. And so some of the focus on definitions and test of details, substantive analytical procedures are all aimed at how you would do an audit in that way. But we know we have not gotten the language quite right yet. But I'm certain we're going to get some comments in that vein as well.
Thanks, Tom. And I think the way you've presented also today to highlight the issues that are of public interest in terms of the slides, it's helpful because that tells me this is front of mind for the board as they go about their decision-making process throughout. I saw a card go up, it's gone down.
I was going to ask a very
the same question. Okay. All right. Thanks, Tom. Shall we proceed?
To say, obviously, all the things we've done on internal controls there. So that takes us to the 500 series. And I think this should be viewed in terms of a broader context at first. And then we could talk a little bit more specifically on the 500 series. The broader context is our approach to modernizing the standards. If you remember, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was all this talk about maybe we should do an omnibus improvement of our standards and go through standards one by one and update them for technology. And this seemed to me to be a very unwieldy approach. So what we decided to do is focus on the standards that we could do pretty relatively narrow scope work to modernize to account for technological impacts. And the 500 series was one. So if you think about 501, which is sort of 3 standards in one, 505, which is related to external confirmations, and then sampling. That's where we started off. I think this is a really good example of how we make scoping decisions too, and how we are led by where the evidence takes us. And through all of our outreach and through our internal research and work with regulators, et cetera, we said, let's stick just to the inventory component of 501, put litigation claims and segment information. But remember, this is all through a technology lens. Even though people would like us to deal with those issues, our priorities are technology. External confirmations, obviously we know the impact of technology in terms of the reliability of evidence from external confirmations, and the impact of technologies and approaches like direct access, which isn't actually an API, necessarily a confirmation itself, but something that needs to be clarified. And like focusing on that and dealing with things that don't need to be dealt with standard setting elsewhere. So audit sampling, in fact, I know there are 1 or 2 standard setters and regulators who believe it's a high priority, but our evidence in the marketplace suggests that the standard itself is not the problem. It's whether you're in or you're out of the standard and guidance about how to apply when you are in and practices. And this is why we're not totally saying that we're not going to work on audit sampling, but we're going to focus our standard setting efforts on those 501 inventory element and external confirmation. So that is a key element of it. And then we're in the early days. We had our first board meeting on this. So you're just seeing a selection of topics that we've addressed. There's some noise in the marketplace that how could you go about this and not address X, Y, and Z? Well, X, Y, and Z are going to be addressed at our future board meetings. And the idea is to get an exposure draft out approved, I think, in December this year, assuming everything goes smoothly on this topic, and we get it out and be a pretty tightly scoped project in relation to the 500 series. One of the things that's useful on this side is that it will interact closely with our ED for audit evidence and risk response. So that's where we are on this targeted modernization. One other final thing is the board was very explicit that we should look to other national standard setters where they've done more recent work in these areas. Again, let's not reinvent the wheel, and let's not create unintended divergences from existing practices when it's improved. So I hope that gives you a sense of what we're up to here.
Thanks, Tom. And I think I don't see anyone's hand up. I think you managed to make up the time that we lost. So we're still on time now to go straight into the joint public session. And I'm not sure who's leading us between the two of you, but happy to proceed straight into that.
Gabrielle, would you like me to talk about our approach to prioritization first, and then we could? Okay, so there's a lot of discussion, and we've gotten great feedback on that we need to be clearer about how we prioritize and allocate relatively limited resources, particularly in a staff-driven model, to our standard setting. And if I flip to slide 2 here, there is quite a formal process for doing that. We start with our public consultation of our strategy and work plan, which is now 2024 to 2027, where we survey the landscape. We have comment periods on it. We have effectively a consultation paper about what are strategic objectives for us. I think you use a different term, strategic drivers, should be, and then how your work plan drives the enablement of that. Effectively, your work plans are the fundamental operational issue of how you achieve your strategy. The one thing I will say that I think these things aren't etched in stone for either board. These all apply to, we've adapted throughout our work plans to do it, our pivot towards technology and our desire to both boards to give sort of this period of calm before new standards become effective was a reflection of marketplace input. We clearly get input from external stakeholders to drive this dynamic view. We speak with the MGU, the Stakeholder Advisory Council, and a range of bilateral and other settings out in the marketplace. Both boards do quarterly assessments of our progress in the shifting landscapes, and an annual assessment of risk and opportunities. This happens at the senior management level. This means by senior management for both boards, we do it with our technical directors, our directors, and the staff, ultimately filter it down. It happens across the boards too. Villy and Ken actively plan. There's a whole sequencing of our work programs to try to minimize burdens on our stakeholders and make sure that all the comment periods don't end simultaneously and that there's some thought process in there. And we speak about the overlapping elements of it. The big thing is that both boards do evidence-based project plans. This is why, from a PIOB standpoint, I know you do. I think the project plans are almost one of the most important things that we do. It's where we connect our potential work with the public interest framework. We articulate our public interest objectives of each project, and we describe how we're going to address those. And so at the end of the day, I think the question before you and our accountability is, have we done it in an appropriately evidence-based manner, following our due process, in a way that reaches not a specific outcome, but a legitimate outcome based upon the evidence? And I think as you think about what type of questions you ask us, that's obviously something we are always willing to answer, and I think that's a really great place for our interactions to be on. Always go back to that project plan. And you think we talked about that a little bit today when on 500 of these were the objectives of the project and have we achieved them? And then obviously we constrain our project planning and our prioritization with the existing staff complement and the approved budget. The existing staff complement doesn't drive our projects in a quantity of projects, we're already constrained, but we do prioritize based upon what we have. And then you see other considerations on the side. The other thing is we're trying to leverage resources as much as possible. Our standards are used in approximately 130 countries around the world. most national standard setters have similar complements to staff. So we're asking for, on our side, 16, your side, I think, Gabrielle, is about 14 members. You're asking us to do a lot with very little. And so we have to leverage. We're working with jurisdictional standard setters. We get flexible resources with consultants, fellows, and technical advisors. We liaise with external groups. We establish working group and reference groups. And then obviously there's a whole series of cost discipline measures. And maybe this is a good place to pause before we go to the strategy period, and maybe I'll turn over to Gabrielle when we get to that. But Gabrielle, anything to add on this topic?
Not really, thank you very much. I think that the only thing that I'd like to stress is that with respect to how we plan, how we prioritize and all these things, that this permanent monitoring that you mentioned, Tom, and the way we quarterly assess progress, issues, and etc., allows us very quickly to adjust both the strategy when necessary, and that is clear on both boards that we have been including things in our strategy and work plan which were not initially foreseen, but also at the project level as well. It allows us and it takes us to change the direction or the course or the pace or whatever, the outreach, whenever we see it necessary. So this is just to provide this idea that we are not rigid. Of course, we need a strategy, we need a work plan, we need a guide for the work for a certain cycle, but we are completely open and flexible and attentive so that we can adjust as we go and as needed.
No, thanks, Tom. And maybe before I open to the board members, just to acknowledge that when we do look at the strategy and work plan, I think at that point we're just appreciating the what and not the how. So it is useful to then dial it back to say, are we now going to execute this in the most cost-effective way? Resource allocation and use and all of that. So I guess the sort of the insights with hindsight is that there's always room for improvement in terms of how we do things in the spirit of efficiencies and effectiveness. So I think that's a key factor that we see. But let me turn to Tom and also Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's I would like to echo your point of the cost effectiveness. As for the project management, I think that's the both IWSB and ESB are doing very well. And I think that's the bold improvement is also very well, how can I say, designed. But there may be another challenge which Gabriela has suggested is that currently the communication, especially I think the podcast of the ESB is very high quality and good. But as you said, that it requires a quite lot of resources as well. So how do you manage the board discussion of the both IWSB's board and ESB's board, not only for the project management, but also for the communication side as well? So how the balance of the two boards should be and how the communication with the board, each board should be, because it's one of the, how can I say, resource allocation or selection, not only within each board, but between the board as well. How do we, should we, how can I say, get the right balance between the two boards? So it's very tough question, but difficult issue, but I'm very happy if you have any consideration on the balance between the two boards. Thank you.
Should we also take Dave's point? Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Tom, I am intrigued and appreciate your comment about the importance of the project plan. And I guess the question that raises in my mind is there, when you refer to the project plan, is there a framework that the boards follow in developing project plans that include things like the problem statement and the evidence behind that, potential solutions? Can we resolve this in a reasonable period of time with actionable solutions and things like that? Is there kind of a defined elements of that, or you know, I guess I'll stop there.
I'll take that last question and then we could jointly answer. Like from our standpoint, the framework for activities is what drives it. We do have a formal methodology of developing a project plan. That being said, there's probably room for always being clearer on a few things, but we talk about what the public interest rationale, it's always driven by the evidence that we've gotten from the information gathering and research phase of a project that's presented to the board, and we try to be really tightly in the scope of why this will address that with timelines. So, I think as we consider enhancements to our activities and our due process or working procedures, it's something to look at if it's deficient, but I believe that we do try to articulate that quite well.
Hey, can I ask a follow-up question before you move on? And this is maybe something for all of us to think about is as we consider the strategy and work plans that the boards put together, is maybe there's some summary of the project plan or something that we should also think about, not just the real high level, these are the 6 or 8 topics we plan to address over the next 3 years, but maybe I'm just wondering if there might be some elements of that from an oversight perspective that we should also consider as we evaluate it. It's a point for thought. I don't think there's an answer today, but as we embark on that process, we might want to consider it.
I think in my mind, as you think about oversight and your role and how you interact with us and how the public interest framework actually works in practice, these are the real questions to ask. Like the more we could get on, is the strategy and work plan appropriate for these type of organizations? And are we creating operational plans, which the work plans de facto are, because that's what we do, that could fulfill that strategy? It's the right place to be, rather than us necessarily being, once we're into the standard, like obviously people, if we're removing stuff that shouldn't be removed, raise it. But I think this is a really useful dynamic for an oversight body and a standard setting board.
Maybe I'll try to respond to Tom's question, if there is a response to you. Of course, how we balance this effort between the two boards. We have specific staff allocated to each board, but sometimes we go beyond this, what we have in terms of each board, and we join efforts in some areas. This is the first thing. So if you think about the JSS meetings, for instance, which are very demanding in terms of preparation, in terms of agenda, SAC meetings as well, where the teams work together. On technology, there have been some joint initiatives. So look at what happened with FCG, which is a YESBA project, but where ISSB kindly, significantly contributed to help put this linkages document forward. So we don't have a guide or a standard about how to make this work together. I think that the fact that we are very small organizations also helps in that respect, and that we are very closely working together, not only as co-CEOs, but as chairs and etc., helps address those needs as we go and find some opportunities as we go as well. So, and of course, if there is anything that comes that requires uniting efforts and resources, we will surely do. There is no rigidity here, no silos. But I think that, and I think that it has been working well. We have some staff which is allocated to some joint initiatives. For instance, I was saying yesterday, the 60% that we have from one person who is doing JSS for both boards, and things like that. So we see it's a very small organizations. We don't have much, time or space or hours left from the staff. So as we go, we need to see where there is some room, some flexibility when we need to do something together. I don't know if you want to add anything, Tom.
And I think we have just evaluate the need depending upon the specific project, you talked specifically about communications or stakeholder outreach. In my mind, as an element of communications, we embed that in our project planning. So as it's needed, like we think about like how I view each project. Maybe this is the way to think about it. We want the highest quality outcomes that respond to a well-designed project plan that could get the support of the board and generate broad respect and adoption globally. That's a constrained optimization exercise of which we need to engage with stakeholders here. And so, like, in each project, we think through both through that dimension.
Yeah, the other Tom, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a comment, because the current SWP period, I think it's very robust approach, and the getting the high quality standard or code itself isn't sort of the ultimate objective. But if you look at the other standard setters, then we would pay more attention to the communication, for example, or the implementation, or the adoption and implementation may require quite a lot of resources as well. So in that case, in this period, it may be okay. But when we think about the future, there may be some sort of a balance of the budget for the communication and the implementation. That sort of the discussion will have to be evolved in the near future. That's a comment I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thanks for the comment. Okay. You look like you wanted to say something. Thanks for that. That's why he looked like he wanted to say something. Thank you, James. You're next, I guess.
Sorry. I think you just want to
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. So the survey was released in January and will be open until the 15th of May. It's one of the many surveys that we needed to issue in this first part of the year, but we tried to make it earlier than the others to make sure that it was not going to be too much impacted by the other surveys on specific matters that we needed to release. So this is the timeline. In September, we hope to have the analysis from the staff of the responses received. And the objective is that in December 2027, we have this approved. We'll see if it's going to be necessary, depending on other circumstances, to extend this period a little bit into the March 2028 or something like that, depending on the changes and rotations on chairmanship of the boards and things like that. But this is, for now, the timeline that we're having, and we are following the same process, I would say a joint process with respect to the way we are communicating and reaching out to stakeholders for this strategy and work plan. It's not easy to reach out to stakeholders in this respect, so we have been doing a little bit of work with the communications team, but also with the technical team, which is more responsible here for this, to see who specifically we need to address on a one-on-one basis. If Tom and I have to do some additional efforts with respect to some groups of stakeholders or some specific stakeholders, because we really need and want to have some successful outcomes from this survey, because it's really what's going to be the basis of the next consultations. So this strategy survey focuses on three elements: our strategic positioning in the context where we are, the trends impacting us, and the possible areas for joint actions. It also, of course, asks members to suggest areas for each one of the boards, if that is the case. The survey has been launched on an online version. There have been some some difficulties from some stakeholders with this online version that we have been, we need to address continuously to try to make sure that everyone that wants to respond that way may respond that way. But of course, we are providing alternative ways in case there are any difficulties. Since this is a joint survey, and I think it's the first time that we do it, some stakeholders who regularly respond to these consultations are approaching us saying, well, I wanted to say something specifically to ISSB or to the ESBA. How can I do it? I think that the survey provides that opportunity if really stakeholders want to do specific comments or suggestions for each one of the boards. But the fact that it's a joint survey sometimes leaves the stakeholders a little bit intrigued about how to manage these different responses. But that's where we are. It's been it's going to be 1 month, 4 weeks more until the end of the period, and we really hope to have a significant number and quality in the responses more than a number. For now, there are not that many responses, but of course we know that these things happen on, if it's until the 15th of May, most of the responses will come on the 15th of May and not before, also because of the other standards. So that's where we are with this survey. Well, of course, I'll take the slides as read, but we will need, based on this survey, to define the future and take all the information and the inspiration that we will need for both the consultations that will follow this common survey. There will be 2 different consultations, as you know, for each one of the boards, but of course, based on what we will learn from this survey. Dave, to your question a bit earlier about if it's going to be possible to provide in the future some substance about each one of the projects. Of course, we will take your question and comment back for consideration. There is, when you see the project definition, work plan design, and etc. Of course, we have all this very clear in our minds. Sometimes it's not possible in advance to anticipate what this project is going to be. If we see the trend, we see the risk, we see the need for a response, but it's possible that we don't see yet how we are going to address that topic. It depends very much on the matters, on the issues, etc. So I think this is the last one. Yeah. So happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Gabriela and Tom. And I guess as we finish this session of the joint venture, I'll take the questions just now in terms of the working together and collaboration and all of these. So I guess for future considerations, maybe as part of this presentation, let's just appreciate where we are with the PIRs and what collaborative efforts are happening there. Also around the NAMs, and I guess also just understanding what challenges are coming from the collective. I think we need to more and more start thinking of ourselves as one system rather than 2 separate entities working in the interest of strengthening the global standards. So with that in mind, I think let me start with Mark and then I'll work around the room. Mark?
Yeah, just questions in 2 areas. Firstly, the development of NAM. Now, Tom sort of described his sort of Channel 4 approach. Gabriela, to what extent, where is your board in the equivalent space? What are you doing to sort of more formalize the development of NAM within your own board? Are you going to be adopting a similar sort of approach to the IAASB or what? Where are you on that? That's the first question. And the second question is generally to the 2 of you, and that is on the strategic work plan. I think probably one of the main changes since the last work plan was done is that we now have the Standards Advisory Council, which I think was in its infancy, probably, wasn't it, when the previous plan was done. I'd be very interested to know, in developing this plan, the extent of your interaction with the Standards Advisory Council, because it seems to me, there's a resource there. Yes, of course, you're doing your survey, but you've got a fairly diverse group of stakeholders there. So I'd be interested, as I say, to hear the extent of the interactions, how you're interacting with them in developing the plan.
Well, thank you, Mark. With respect to where the ESB is in respect to institutionalizing or formalizing any process for NAM, we are looking at it for now through the lenses of the FCG project, where we have already committed to follow a process with public consultation and everything, given the relevance of the topic. We have not yet thought about a common global approach to NAM, and of course, this since the IWSP is a little bit more advanced, probably we will work together on that. Being very well aware that this is a very difficult area. Also, first because NAM means all and everything, and as Tom was saying, I think I also hate the word and the acronym, because you can call NAM anything, or not. There was, before my time, at some point in time, there was an exercise, a clarification about what could be NAM, what was not NAM. We are recovering that work that was done on the different materials and ways of approaching stakeholders that was done before, and start from there to see what comes out of this, how we can classify the materials and the related processes. Sometimes even the board members are not fully comfortable when we start speaking about NAM, and they ask, what's that? The ones from the firms over time have been very familiar to the acronym and the word and what we do under NAM. The others who are not practitioners are not necessarily always completely comfortable when we say, this is NAM, and we are speaking about different things. So yes, this is something that we ourselves start feeling that we need to do more in a more structured way. Again, something for FCG in case. I think that at the end we will do some NAM, be it a hybrid approach or not. And if that's the case, we have committed to do it in a very formal way. To your second question on the Stakeholder Advisory Council, and then I'll ask Tom also if he wants to say something. But yes, we have used that resource extensively. The strategy and work plan was brought since the start to the Stakeholder Advisory Council. But even if it's not formally a consultation with the SAC, sometimes about the strategy and work plan survey, these discussions are taken back by us as a very, very relevant source of information, inspiration, concerns, advice, etc. So we are not misusing such a relevant group of people, and it's been extremely helpful in some moments. I can tell you, for instance, that the decision to anticipate the PIRs on NOCLAR and the restructured code came mostly from the SAC, from the Stakeholder Advisory Council. And they were very clear on that. This is just a small example, but I think that Tom will tell you the same, but we are using them extensively.
Just in the development of our future one, I think it's a core role of the Stakeholder Advisory Council to get input. Like we debated at this meeting, do we want to effectively use the Stakeholder Advisory Council as sort of a forum to do the survey with, and we've opted to do that later. So they're going to advise us on like future actions and future approaches for the development of this work plan. I think in September, we will go to specific feedback that we're hearing and have them help us distill what we've heard. And I think this is just an explicit role, like if you bring a strategic group like that together. And then, as Gabriella says, then they're there to help us make sure, as you have a strategy work plan like we have in 2024 to 2027, that we're executing it on it in an appropriate way. So I hope that gives you some confidence that we're going to do that.
Just on the last point, Tom, your earlier point, you alluded to the fact that I guess the oversight should assess whether, well, how well you have executed against this outgoing strategy and work plan. And I'm wondering, will we have some sort of a write-up that comes from the SSBs to tell us this is how we have fared against what was originally proposed as we are coming to the end of 2027?
Well, just to point out, when I report to this board in written thing, it's always in the context. If you notice, I do it, of course, according to strategic objectives. If you want a broad overview of how we report after the whole period, I'm certain we can do that as well, and we could take that into account if that's useful. But what we've started to do when I took over as chair is always report in the context of our strategic objectives, because that is our North Star. And so certainly open to having a broader discussion of it and report. We'll just have to figure out what the appropriate time frame is for you to get like almost the cumulative report of all the quarterly reports you've gotten.
I was actually not looking for a comprehensive document, just a summary of this is what you have approved, this is how we've done against it, and that's it. I think you had a question? Yeah.
Thank you, Seko. Really just an invitation for a brief comment. And separate to Mark's question on the SAC, which obviously is very, very important, and thank you for your response. Could you just briefly describe, we understand there's a number of new advisory groups for different stakeholders, whether that's academics or investors and profession, etc., how they fit into the due process as you see it. And in particular, I'm just airing this in public session as well as you know, that's not immediately visible from the public oversight perspective. So are there some elements where it's working well, but there might be a benefit in some additional transparency on how they're functioning, or do you think that's already appropriately dealt with in terms of how you are reporting to us on due process? So just an invitation for a few reflections on that would be helpful.
Yeah, I have the same question.
Thanks, Han. Are you adding on to?
I just want you to check whether they're genuinely complementary and supportive of the SAC, rather than creating overlaps or unintended concentration of influence. Has there been any deliberate thinking or analysis about how all these groups or individuals of same traits or possibly relate to each other from that perspective? Same question basically.
So our desire to have these groups or different groups is partly a way to handle input in a sort of a more organized way. The alternative is having to go out bilaterally and seek out things. So we're trying to concentrate. Like if you think about the different groups that we're establishing, whether it's across the two boards, the stakeholder advisory group brings a broad range of global stakeholders thinking in an integrated fashion. We've now created a special user advisory group that getting users engaged and finding a way to engage them in a sufficient way is hard. And building that group will take some learning and understanding, but I think we've now a forum for that. Like from an academic perspective, we interact with the IAER pretty closely, and there's a range of groups. It goes back to the same thing, no different than profession as well, or regulators, is that we have to balance the different perspectives. We don't count the votes ever. No one has special, we have we understand where the input's coming from, why the perspective is where it is, and how we could get through it. One of the more interesting topics is like how often we will now use project-specific working groups too, and how that feeds back. And I think the way we give confidence to the system is that we have balanced compositions and we're transparent about the types of feedback they're given to us in our board papers. And that's at least the way I'm thinking of it, but our use of those will mature over time.
If I may add, of course, just like Tom said, this is a more structured and organized way of getting feedback. But also it's a matter of accountability and transparency, because the alternative was to have, I don't know how many meetings with specific people who sometimes are not the right people to approach. It happened before, and I remember discussions that we had last year, 1 year ago, under in the context of that meeting that IFAC called that summit or whatever. And that sometimes the people with whom we speak when we go one by one may not be the right people, because we were very frequently put in circumstances where John or Mary from specific firm or specific regulator says something as if it was the opinion of the firm or the regulator or the group, etc. And then you go and you see that there are completely different opinions from the group or the state, etc. I could give you very interesting examples, and I tell it both from the side of the firms and regulators, because sometimes regulators come as if they were the regulator or speaking on behalf of the regulators, while it's not the case. It's one person with a certain opinion. So this really avoids or tries to avoid this situation. That's why we ourselves made a call to stakeholders to get more organized, so that when we reach out to them, it is done in a structured manner, and they have the opportunity to connect between them before they come and provide us an opinion or an advice or whatever. Most of these meetings have some kind of minutes or some kind of summaries or whatever in case it's necessary. So we don't just take them by memory or what impresses us the most. And it is extensively used then in the way we do our work. We would not have any problem if that's of interest to this group in, I don't know, once a year, give you a broad vision about how these groups are influencing our work and how we are seeing the feedback and the working process and whatever. But it's really, I think it's a much better way of engaging with stakeholders than going to one user or another regulator.
No, that's helpful, and I think what the board members are saying is a bit more transparency around that process, and therefore I think that share would be in the interest of that transparency, supporting the transparency. Thank you so much. I think we are done with the joint session, and I want to thank both chairs for having come through to share with us progress with their respective boards. I guess now we are where we are with Mr. Gunn. Is that you next? Take it away.
No, I think it's us for approval our minutes
and then he will come in.
No, I will comment briefly on what we've received.
Okay, James. All right. Thank you so much. I think now we go into the approval items, which is item 21. We are approving 2 sets of minutes. The one from December 2025, where we did the certification, and then the January public interest, public session minutes. And I look around the room and to Felipe in terms of are there any comments, or are we okay to approve? I am seeing nods and I'm seeing everybody's happy. Let the record show the minutes have been approved. The 2 sets of minutes have been approved. Then we move on to the next public session agenda item for noting. And this is just the timetable for the SSB approvals for 2026, which really is not much. And then the due process public interest framework status as reported by both boards, which is for noting. With that, I think that's the last. The calendar is also up and shared, and I think it's been updated. Yes, over to you, SG.
Thank you, Chair. So, and really just briefly, particularly for those who will follow online and see for public record. So just to note the forthcoming meeting, so on the 27th, 28th of April, the Stakeholder Advisory Council will take place here in Madrid, and our Chair, Sejo, will be the observer at that meeting. Just to confirm the observations for forthcoming ISSB and ISBA meetings, to note that the mid-quarter call for the ISSB, which has just been referenced from the Chair, will be observed by our board member, Dave Sullivan. Thank you, Dave, because I know it's a very early start for you, but we appreciate your commitment for that. Thank you. And then for the subsequent meetings in June, for the ISBA, Philippe Christel will be our observer for that, taking place in New York. And for the ISSB, Han Yi will be in Mainz in Germany, so thank you, Han. I draw to attention that the next PIOB board meeting will be in July, over 8-10 July, and a final decision on whether that is virtual or in person will be made in the coming weeks. We do have provision for one more in-person meeting in 2026, and it's a decision as to whether that is in July or in October, depending on the agenda that we have to deal with. I note that the rest of the calendar of observations for the year is pretty much organized, but there is one observation to finalize. So just in the interest of avoiding any confusion, we'll say we will confirm the second half of the year of observations in due course. So, Chair, thank you. If there are any questions on that, obviously happy to take them.
Does not look like there's any questions. No? Happy. I think the items have been noted. At this particular juncture, should we then pause and take a break? Because we've been going for a while now.
I think we can.
And then I can close the public session and we.
I believe we can close the public session at this point, Chair, if you're comfortable with that. We will have a small break and then continue with a private session.
All right. Thank you for those who had joined online, but we will be closing the public session.